Montana Territory, 1878. The vast plains stretched like an endless sea beneath the clear blue sky, promising nothing but loneliness to those brave enough or foolish enough to stake their claim. Owen Calloway had long ago decided that the promise of the frontier was a cruel joke played on dreamers and fools. At 26, he'd already lived enough lifetimes of heartache to know better than to hope for anything permanent in a land that took more than it gave. The wind whipped through the tall grass as Owen guided his horse along the ridge overlooking Whitewater Creek. 5 years he'd spent building the Circle C ranch from nothing, and 5 years he'd spent convincing himself that the empty feeling in his chest was simply the price of frontier success. Men weren't meant to put down roots out here, not the kind that lasted anyway. The West was for drifters, for men who understood that everything beautiful eventually withered under the harsh sun. "Time to head back, Storm," he murmured to his black stallion, patting the horse's muscular neck. The animal snorted in response, seemingly more content with their solitary existence than Owen himself felt on this particular evening. The ranch hands would be expecting him for supper. Though he employed 5 men to help with the cattle operation, Owen kept his distance. Better to be respected than loved in a place where tomorrow was never guaranteed. His father had taught him that lesson the hard way, bleeding out in Owen's arms after rustlers attacked their small homestead in Kansas. Owen had been just 17 then, watching his father's dreams die alongside him. "A man builds his own fate out here," he told himself as the ranch buildings came into view. The modest main house, the bunkhouse for the hands, the barn and corral, all testament to his blood and sweat. Yet something was missing, something he refused to acknowledge in the light of day. At night, though, when the vastness of the Montana sky threatened to swallow him whole, Owen sometimes allowed himself to wonder what it might be like to have someone waiting for him, someone whose smile might warm the cold corners of his heart. But by dawn, he always remembered his creed. The frontier was no place for love, only survival. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Owen rose before the sun, as was his habit, and stood on the porch of his cabin watching the first golden rays spill over the eastern mountains. The cattle drive to Helena would begin in 3 days, and there was much to prepare. "Morning, boss," called Jasper, his foreman, approaching from the bunkhouse. The older man had been with Owen since the beginning, one of the few people he almost trusted. "Jasper, coffee's brewing inside." Owen nodded toward the door. "Much obliged. Thought you might want to know, Doc Sullivan's wagon broke down about 5 miles east. Jackson and Peters rode out to help, but they'll need more hands if they're gonna get it fixed before nightfall." Owen frowned. "Doc Sullivan's making house calls this far out." "Not exactly." Jasper shifted his weight. "Doc's got his niece with him. They were heading to Helena when an axle cracked. She's come from back east somewhere to live with him after her parents passed." Something tightened in Owen's chest, an uncomfortable sensation he quickly dismissed. "I'll ride out. Tell Simmons to finish breaking that new Palomino while I'm gone." 20 minutes later, Owen rode toward the rising dust cloud that marked the location of the stranded wagon. As he approached, he could make out 2 of his ranch hands working alongside an older gentleman he recognized as Doc Sullivan from his infrequent visits to Helena. What Owen wasn't prepared for was the young woman standing nearby, her honey-blonde hair gleaming in the morning sunlight. She wore a practical traveling dress of deep blue, the color of summer twilight, though the fabric was dusty from the journey. Even from a distance, Owen could see she stood with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the harsh landscape. He slowed Storm to a walk, suddenly aware of his trail-worn appearance. Foolish, he thought. What did it matter what some Eastern girl thought of him? "Mr. Calloway," Doc Sullivan called out, waving his hat. "Mighty kind of you to send help." Owen dismounted, nodding briefly at the doctor before turning to his ranch hands. "What's the damage?" "Cracked axle, boss," Jackson reported. "We can jury-rig it enough to get them to your place, but it'll need proper repairs before they can continue to Helena." Owen frowned, about to suggest they simply escort the pair to town, when the young woman stepped forward. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice clear and steady as a mountain stream, "I'm Bethany Hayes, Dr. Sullivan's niece. I do hope we're not imposing, but my uncle speaks very highly of your hospitality." Her eyes met his, deep brown with flecks of amber that caught the sunlight, and Owen felt something shift inside him, like the ground giving way beneath his feet. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her already beautiful face into something that made his chest ache. No imposition, Miss Hayes, he heard himself say, though the words seemed to come from someone else. My ranch is just a few miles west. You're welcome to stay until the wagon's repaired. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. The smile remained, warming him in places long cold. Uncle James tells me you've built quite an impressive operation here. Owen cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable with her direct gaze. It's just cattle and land, ma'am. Nothing special out here. On the contrary, she replied, something knowing in her expression. I think creating something lasting in such wilderness requires remarkable character. There was that word, lasting. Owen turned away, busying himself with the wagon inspection. Nothing lasted out here, not really. The West consumed everything eventually, hopes, dreams, love. It was foolish to think otherwise. Yet as they traveled the short distance back to the Circle C, Owen found himself stealing glances at Bethany Hayes, wondering what twist of fate had brought this ray of sunshine to his dusty corner of the territory, and how quickly he could send her on her way before she disrupted the careful isolation he'd built around himself. The arrival of the doctor and his niece created a stir at the Circle C. Mrs. Winters, the widow who cooked for the ranch, practically bubbled over with excitement at having another woman to talk to. The hands stood straighter, attempted to smooth their wild hair, and suddenly remembered their manners when Bethany Hayes descended from the wagon. Owen watched with growing unease as his carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. At 22 years old, Bethany Hayes possessed not just beauty, but a self-assured grace that seemed to draw everyone into her orbit. Even Jasper, who typically regarded strangers with suspicious eyes, was soon smiling and offering to show her the new foals in the corral. Your ranch is wonderful, Mr. Calloway, she said at supper that evening, after settling into the spare room Owen reluctantly offered. There's something honest about it, like it belongs here. Owen shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. It's functional, that's all that matters out here. Is it? She asked, her head tilting slightly. Is function truly all that matters in life? The question hung in the air between them, and Owen felt the other eyes at the table watching him with interest. He'd never been good at pretty words or philosophy. In the West, yes, he finally replied. Form follows function. Anything else is just decoration that'll get stripped away when winter comes or drought hits or Indians raid. A momentary shadow passed over her face. I see. And is that why there are no photographs on your walls, no personal touches in your home, because they'll just get stripped away? Owen felt his jaw tighten. Miss Hayes, I don't mean to be rude, but you've been in Montana territory for all of one day. Perhaps reserve judgment until you've seen what this land can do. I didn't mean to offend, she said softly. I've seen my share of hardship, Mr. Calloway. Different from yours, perhaps, but pain is universal. Something in her tone made Owen look up from his plate, and what he saw in her eyes, a depth of understanding that belied her years, made him regret his sharp words. The wagon should be repaired within 3 days, he said, changing the subject. We can delay the cattle drive until after you and the doctor continue to Helena. Actually, Doctor, Sullivan interjected, I was hoping to discuss that with you, Owen. My practice in Helena is just getting established, and I can't afford to leave it unattended much longer. I was wondering if Bethany might impose on your hospitality for a few weeks while I return to town and make proper arrangements for her arrival. Owen nearly choked on his coffee. A few weeks. Doctor, this is a working cattle ranch, not a boarding house for young ladies. I assure you, Mr. Calloway, I'm quite capable of earning my keep, Bethany said, her chin lifting slightly. I'm an excellent seamstress, I can cook, and I've some experience with bookkeeping. We already have Mrs. Winters for cooking, Owen protested. Who could use the help, what with feeding all these hungry men? The older woman chimed in, betraying Owen with a conspiratorial smile toward Bethany. Besides, it would be nice to have another woman around. Owen looked around the table, realizing he was outnumbered. Even Jasper, the trader, was nodding in agreement. Fine, he conceded, pushing back from the table. But only until after the cattle drive. Then I'll escort you to Helena myself, Miss Hayes. He strode from the dining room, needing air and distance from the woman who seemed determined to unsettle everything about his carefully constructed world. On the porch, Owen pulled out a cigarillo and struck a match against the railing, watching the small flame dance in the evening breeze before touching it to the tobacco. She's got spirit, Jasper's voice came from behind him. Reminds me a bit of your mother, God rest her soul. Don't start, Owen warned, exhaling a stream of smoke. She's here temporarily, that's all. The old foreman leaned against the porch railing. You know what your problem is, boy. I'm sure you're about to tell me. You've convinced yourself that because you lost folks you loved, loving again ain't worth the risk. Jasper's weathered face was serious in the fading light. But that ain't living, Owen, that's just waiting to die. Owen felt anger rise in his throat. I built this ranch from nothing. I've got more than most men out here dream of having. You've got land and cattle, Jasper agreed. And you're the loneliest man I ever met. Before Owen could reply, the door opened behind them and Bethany stepped onto the porch. She'd changed into a simpler dress of soft yellow cotton, and her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder. Oh, she said, noticing them, I'm sorry to interrupt, I just wanted some fresh air. No interruption at all, Miss Hayes, Jasper said, tipping his hat. I was just heading to the bunkhouse. Good night to you both. The old man winked at Owen before descending the porch steps, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. I sense I've disrupted your routine, Mr. Calloway, Bethany said after a moment. I truly am sorry for the imposition. Owen sighed, tapping ash from his cigarillo. It's not your fault, Miss Hayes. Your uncle put you in an awkward position. Perhaps. She moved to stand beside him at the railing, looking out at the darkening landscape. Or perhaps it's an opportunity. For what? To see the territory through fresh eyes. She turned to look at him, her expression earnest in the gathering dusk. I may be new to Montana, but I'm not fragile, Mr. Calloway. My parents died of influenza last winter. I nursed them both, watched them fade, buried them, and then sold everything to come west. I understand that nothing is permanent. Owen studied her face, seeing the steel beneath her gentle exterior. Then why come here? Why not stay in the East where life is easier? Because easier isn't always better, she replied simply. My father always said that a comfortable life rarely produces character, and after they were gone, there was nothing keeping me there. No connections, no purpose. And you think you'll find purpose in Helena? Owen couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. I think purpose finds us when we're open to possibilities. Her eyes met his again, and Owen felt that same disorienting shift he'd experienced earlier. Uncle James needs help with his practice, and I need a fresh start. A night bird called from somewhere in the darkness, and the lamp from inside cast Bethany's shadow long across the porch planks. Owen found himself wanting to know more about her, this woman who spoke of pain and purpose with equal measure of grace. Your parents, he said finally, were they doctors like your uncle? Her smile returned, softer now. No. My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. My mother taught music. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, but they loved fiercely. That was their legacy to me. Legacy, Owen repeated, tasting the word. He hadn't thought about legacy beyond the boundaries of his land, beyond the brand on his cattle. Everyone leaves something behind, Mr. Calloway, she said. The question is whether it's something worth remembering. With that, she wished him good night and returned inside, leaving Owen alone with thoughts more troubling than any he'd faced in years. He stood on the porch long after she'd gone, smoking and watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky, wondering what legacy a man who refused to love could possibly leave behind. The next morning, Owen rose early as usual, but found Bethany already in the kitchen helping Mrs. Winters prepare breakfast. She'd exchanged her traveling clothes for a simple work dress of faded green, her hair pinned practically at the nape of her neck. Good morning, Mr. Calloway, she greeted him with that same direct gaze that seemed to see right through him. Mrs. Winters has been teaching me to make sourdough biscuits the Montana way. She's a quick study, the older woman affirmed, kneading dough with flour-covered hands. Going to be a real help around here. Owen mumbled a good morning and poured himself coffee, unsure how to navigate this new presence in his morning routine. He preferred silence with his breakfast, time to plan the day's work before giving orders to the men. I understand you're preparing for a cattle drive, Bethany said, setting plates on the table. Uncle James mentioned it might be quite an undertaking. 300 head to Helena, Owen replied, watching her efficient movements. 10 days there and back if the weather holds. It sounds exciting, she said, and to his surprise, she seemed genuinely interested. Will all your men go with you? All but Simmons. He'll stay behind with Mrs. Winters to mind the place. Owen sipped his coffee. And you, I suppose. Actually, she said, turning to face him fully, I was hoping you might consider allowing me to accompany the drive. Owen nearly spilled his coffee. Out of the question. Why? Her chin lifted in that now familiar gesture of determination. I can ride. I'm not afraid of hard work. And it would be an opportunity to see more of the territory before settling in Helena. A cattle drive isn't a sightseeing expedition, Miss Hayes, Owen said firmly. It's dangerous, exhausting work, no place for a woman. Mrs. Winters told me her late husband was a trail cook, and she accompanied him on several drives. Owen shot the older woman a look of betrayal, which she returned with an unrepentant shrug. That was different, he insisted. She was married to him. So it's propriety you're concerned with? Bethany asked. Not my capabilities. Both, Owen said, setting down his cup with more force than necessary. My men need to focus on the cattle, not on watching out for a city girl who's never seen the rough side of the territory. Her eyes flashed. I believe I mentioned yesterday that I'm not fragile, Mr. Calloway. And while I appreciate your concern for my welfare, I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about what risks are acceptable. Before Owen could respond, the door opened and the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, along with Dr. Sullivan. The conversation necessarily shifted, but Owen caught Bethany's gaze across the table more than once during the meal. There was a challenge there, one that unsettled him far more than it should have. After breakfast, Owen escaped to the relative safety of the corral, where he could focus on checking tack and provisions for the drive. He was inspecting a saddle when a shadow fell across his work. She's right, you know, Doctor. Sullivan said, coming to stand beside him. Bethany's tougher than she looks. Owen straightened. Doctor, with all due respect, a cattle drive is no place for your niece. Besides, I thought you wanted her to wait here until you made arrangements in Helena. I do, the older man acknowledged. But I know my niece. She's curious about the West, eager to understand the life her uncle has chosen. And she's stubborn as a Missouri mule when she sets her mind to something. Must run in the family, Owen muttered. The doctor chuckled. Indeed, look, Owen, I'm not saying you should take her. That's your decision as trail boss. I'm just saying don't underestimate her because she's young and female. She managed our family affairs for months after her father fell ill, fought off men trying to cheat her of her inheritance, and traveled halfway across the country alone to start a new life. She's exceptional. Owen frowned, adjusting a stirrup strap with more attention than it required. Even exceptional women can get killed out on the trail, Doctor. Indians, snakes, stampedes, river crossings. There are 100 ways to die between here and Helena. True of anyone who ventures into the wilderness, Sullivan replied mildly. Including stubborn ranchers. It's different. Because you're a man, the doctor raised an eyebrow, or because you've convinced yourself you have nothing to lose. Owen's head snapped up, anger flaring. You don't know anything about me, Doc. I know enough, Sullivan said calmly. I've treated men like you all over the frontier, men who have built walls so high they can't remember what it's like to see beyond them. It's a kind of sickness, Owen, one that kills slower than consumption, but just as surely. I didn't ask for your diagnosis, Owen said coldly. No, you didn't, the doctor sighed. Consider it professional courtesy. And consider this as well. Sometimes the very thing we think will destroy us is actually what saves us in the end. With that cryptic statement, Sullivan walked away, leaving Owen with a saddle in his hands and a storm of unwelcome thoughts in his mind. He glanced toward the house, where he could see Bethany through the window, helping Mrs. Winters with the dishes. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it to gold, and for just a moment, Owen allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to return home to such brightness every day. The thought sent a jolt of something like fear through him, and he turned away sharply. He had a cattle drive to prepare for, men to organize, provisions to check. He had no time for distractions, especially ones with amber-flecked eyes and determined smiles that made him question everything he thought he knew about his place in this harsh, beautiful land. That afternoon, Owen was checking fence lines on the north pasture when he spotted a rider approaching from the direction of the ranch. He squinted against the sun, surprised to recognize Bethany's slight figure atop one of his gentler mares. She rode with confidence, he had to admit, her back straight and her hands sure on the reins. She pulled up alongside him, slightly breathless, her cheeks flushed from the ride. "Your foreman said I might find you here. I hope I'm not interrupting important work." "Just routine checks," Owen replied, trying to ignore how the wind had loosened strands of her hair from its pins. "Did you need something, Miss Hayes?" "Yes, actually," she patted the mare's neck. "A riding lesson." Owen frowned. "You seem to be doing fine on your own." "This is Lady," she said, indicating the placid mare beneath her. "Jasper says she's so gentle a child could ride her. I need to know I can handle a more spirited mount if I'm to be useful on a cattle drive." Owen sighed heavily. "We've already discussed this. You're not coming on the drive." "We've exchanged opinions on the matter," she corrected him, "but I don't believe a final decision has been reached." "Miss Hayes." "Bethany," she interrupted. "If we're to argue, we might as well use Christian names." Despite himself, Owen felt a smile threatening. "Fine, Bethany, I am the owner of this ranch and the trail boss of this drive. I've made my decision." "And I respect your authority, Owen," she said, his name sounding different, better somehow in her voice. "I'm simply asking you to reconsider based on new information." "What new information?" "That I'm an excellent rider who only needs to demonstrate her capabilities with a more challenging mount." She smiled, that same smile that had caught him off guard when they first met. "And that I'm willing to work twice as hard as any man to earn my place on that drive." Owen studied her, noting the determined set of her jaw and the sincerity in her eyes. "Why is this so important to you?" "The drive will be dusty, exhausting, and often boring. It's not some grand adventure." Her expression sobered. "Before my father died, he made me promise something. He said, 'Bethany, don't let fear keep you in one place. See the world.' Live fully." Coming west was the first part of that promise. Understanding the true nature of this territory, not just the sanitized version I'd see from Helena's streets, feels like the next. The wind gusted across the grassland, bending the tall stems in waves. Owen watched them ripple, considering her words. He recognized the need to honor a father's final wishes. Hadn't he spent years trying to build what his own father never could? "One test," he finally said. "Tomorrow morning you'll ride Storm." Her eyes widened. "Your stallion. If you can handle him on a 5-mile circuit of the ranch, I'll consider, mind you, allowing you to join the drive as far as the first camp. After that, we'd send you back with one of the men." "That's hardly—" "That's the offer," Owen cut her off. "Take it or leave it." Bethany studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Tomorrow morning. And if you can't handle Storm, you'll drop this whole idea and wait at the ranch like your uncle intended." "Agreed." She extended her hand to seal the bargain. Owen hesitated before taking it, knowing even this simple contact was dangerous in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Her hand was smaller than his but firm in its grip, and he released it perhaps too quickly. "Tomorrow at dawn, then," she said, turning her mare back toward the ranch. "I look forward to surprising you, Owen Calloway." As he watched her ride away, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a serious miscalculation. Storm was manageable for him but had thrown more than one experienced cowhand. If Bethany were injured, yet there had been something in her eyes, a quiet confidence that gave him pause. Maybe there was more to Bethany Hayes than he'd initially credited, and maybe that was exactly what worried him most. Word of the challenge spread quickly through the ranch. By suppertime, Owen could feel the speculative glances from his men. No doubt there were wagers being placed in the bunkhouse about whether the Eastern girl would even mount the stallion, let alone complete the test. Bethany, for her part, seemed unperturbed by the attention. She chatted easily with Mrs. Winters and Dr. Sullivan throughout the meal, asking intelligent questions about the cattle business and the upcoming drive. Only once did she address the morning's challenge, when she asked Owen if there was anything specific she should wear for the ride. "Trousers would be best," he replied, then realized the impropriety of the suggestion. "Though I understand if you don't have any." "Actually, I do," she said calmly. "I had a pair made before leaving St. Louis, anticipating practical needs in the territory. I've simply been waiting for an appropriate occasion to scandalize everyone." Owen caught the twinkle in her eye and found himself fighting another unwelcome smile. Tomorrow seems as good a time as any for scandal. Indeed, she agreed, and the way her lips curved upward made something warm unfurl in his chest. After dinner, Owen retreated to his study, ostensibly to review the cattle drive plans, but his mind kept wandering to thoughts of Bethany atop Storm. The stallion was high-spirited but not vicious. Still, he was powerful and responsive to the slightest pressure. An inexperienced rider would struggle to control him. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, expecting Jasper with a question about supplies. Instead, it was Bethany who stepped inside, a small book in her hands. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said. "Mrs. Winters mentioned you have quite a collection of books. I thought perhaps we might trade. I've finished this one, and I'd love something new for the evening." Owen gestured to the bookshelves lining one wall. "Help yourself. Most are practical animal husbandry, territory maps, that sort of thing, but there are some novels on the lower shelves." Bethany moved to the bookcase, her fingers trailing over the spines with evident appreciation. "My father loved books," she said softly. "He used to say they were windows into worlds we might never see otherwise." "Wise man," Owen commented, watching her select a volume of Emerson's essays. "He was." She turned to face him, the book held against her chest. "Thank you for the challenge tomorrow, Owen. Regardless of the outcome, I appreciate being taken seriously." The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Most women would be terrified at the prospect. "Perhaps I'm not most women," her gaze held as steadily. "Or perhaps fear and courage aren't mutually exclusive. One can be afraid and still proceed." "Is that what you're doing? Proceeding despite fear?" Her smile was softer now, more vulnerable. "Isn't that what we're all doing out here? The West doesn't suffer cowards, but it doesn't require fearlessness either, just the will to face what comes." Owen leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You have interesting notions for someone new to the territory." "I've had good teachers," she replied. "Books, my father's stories, and now, observation." Her eyes swept over him briefly. "I think perhaps you and I are not so different, Owen. We've both lost family. We're both trying to honor their memory in our own ways. The difference is that I don't believe isolation is the answer." Her words struck too close to home, and Owen felt his defenses rise. "You don't know anything about my choices, Bethany." "No," she acknowledged, moving toward the door. "But I'd like to. That's the difference between us. I'm still curious about people. I haven't decided. The world has nothing left to offer me." Before he could formulate a response, she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of lavender in her wake. Owen stared at the empty doorway for a long moment, then rubbed a hand over his face. Dangerous, he thought. Bethany Hayes was far more dangerous than any stallion. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Owen had been up for an hour already, checking Storm's tack himself, and ensuring the stallion was properly exercised before Bethany's test. The horse sensed something unusual in the preparation and danced nervously in the corral as Owen adjusted the stirrups to accommodate a smaller rider. "You're making a mistake," Jasper commented, leaning on the fence. "That girl's got no business on Storm." "That's what I'm counting on," Owen replied. "Once she sees what she's up against, she'll abandon this notion of joining the drive." Jasper snorted. "You don't know women very well, do you, boy? Especially that one. She's got something to prove." Before Owen could respond, he spotted Bethany approaching from the main house. She was indeed wearing trousers, practical dark brown ones paired with a simple white blouse and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the sun. Her hair was braided tightly against her head, and she walked with purpose, though Owen could detect a slight hesitation in her step as she neared the corral. "Good morning, gentlemen," she greeted them, her voice steady despite the early hour. "I see our challenge awaits." Storm snorted and pawed the ground, as if aware he was the subject of conversation. The stallion was 17 hands of solid muscle, his black coat gleaming in the early light. "This is Storm," Owen said unnecessarily. "He's been with me for 4 years. He's spirited but not mean. Still, he requires a firm hand." Bethany approached the fence, studying the horse with serious eyes. "He's magnificent," she said softly. "He's also powerful enough to break your neck if you can't control him," Owen warned, suddenly uncomfortable with the whole arrangement. "Perhaps we should reconsider." "No," Bethany said firmly, though he could see her swallow hard. I agreed to your terms. I intend to meet them. Owen nodded, leading Storm to the mounting block. I'll help you up. Once you're settled, we'll open the corral and make a 5-mile circuit of the north pasture. If at any point you feel you can't handle him, just say the word and I'll take the reins. Understood. She climbed the block and took a deep breath before allowing Owen to help her into the saddle. Storm immediately sensed the lighter weight and unfamiliar rider, sidestepping nervously. Bethany gripped the saddle horn for a moment, her knuckles white, but then visibly forced herself to relax. She adjusted her seat, took up the reins properly, and nodded to Owen. "Ready," she said, her voice only slightly tremulous. Owen mounted his secondary horse, a steady gelding named Copper, and signaled for Jasper to open the corral gate. "Keep him at a walk until you get the feel of him," he instructed as they moved out into the open field. Bethany nodded, her focus entirely on the horse beneath her. Storm pranced and tossed his head, testing his new rider, but to Owen's surprise, Bethany remained calm. She spoke quietly to the stallion, her hands firm but not tight on the reins. After a few minutes of walking, Storm settled somewhat, though his ears flicked back and forth, still assessing this unusual situation. "He's responding to your voice," Owen observed. "That's good. Try a gentle trot now, just along this flat stretch." Bethany nodded again and carefully signaled Storm to increase his pace. The stallion snorted but complied, breaking into a smooth trot. Owen watched closely for signs of panic or poor form in Bethany's riding, but though she was clearly concentrating hard, she maintained her seat well. They continued this way for nearly a mile, gradually increasing speed as Bethany's confidence with the stallion grew. Owen found himself impressed despite his reservations. She had clearly understated her riding abilities. "You've ridden difficult mounts before," he commented as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek. "My grandfather raised horses in Pennsylvania," Bethany explained, patting Storm's neck with genuine affection. "I spent summers there as a child. He believed girls should ride as well as boys, much to my mother's dismay." "Your grandfather taught you well." She smiled at the compliment. "Storm is by far the most powerful horse I've ever ridden, but the principles are the same. Respect the animal, stay calm, and be clear about what you want." "Good advice for more than just horsemanship," Owen observed, surprising himself with the philosophical turn. Bethany's eyes met his, something warm in their depths. "Indeed, shall we continue?" They resumed their ride, completing nearly 3 miles without incident. Owen was beginning to think he'd severely underestimated Bethany's abilities when disaster struck. A jackrabbit burst from the brush directly in front of them, startling both horses. Copper recovered quickly, but Storm reared, nearly unseating Bethany. She clung desperately as the stallion came back down, then immediately bolted forward. Owen watched in horror as Storm broke into a full gallop, heading straight for a section of rough terrain. "Pull hard right," Owen shouted, spurring Copper after them, away from the rocks. Whether Bethany heard him or acted on instinct, she managed to turn the panicked stallion just enough to avoid the worst of the rocky ground. But Storm was in full flight now, running flat out across the grassland. Owen pushed Copper to his limits, gradually gaining ground on the runaway horse. He could see Bethany low over Storm's neck, still maintaining her seat through sheer determination, but her arms must be burning with the effort of trying to control the powerful animal. "Bethany," he called when he was close enough, "stop fighting him, let him run it out." She glanced at him, face pale but composed, and nodded. She eased her grip on the reins just enough to stop pulling against Storm's mouth while maintaining contact. Gradually, the stallion's panic subsided, his headlong rush slowing to a controlled gallop and then, finally, to a trot. When Storm finally stopped, sides heaving, Bethany sat straight in the saddle for a moment before her shoulders slumped in evident relief. Owen pulled Copper alongside, ready to help her dismount, but she straightened again, determination returning to her features. "I'm finishing the course," she said, voice shaky but resolute. "We still have 2 miles to go." Owen stared at her in disbelief. "Bethany, you nearly died just now. No one would blame you for stopping." "I would blame me," she replied simply. "I accepted the challenge. Storm and I had a disagreement, but we've sorted it out now." She patted the stallion's sweat-dampened neck. "Haven't we, boy?" As if in answer, Storm tossed his head and snorted, seeming calmer now that he'd worked out his excess energy. Owen shook his head, torn between admiration and exasperation. Fine, but we go slowly from here, and if there's any sign he's not completely under control, we're done. Bethany nodded her agreement, and they resumed their circuit at a sedate pace. Owen watched her carefully, noting how her hands had steadied and her posture remained correct despite what must have been considerable fatigue in her arms and legs. When they finally returned to the ranch yard, a small crowd had gathered. Evidently word of Storm's bolt had reached the hands. Dr. Sullivan pushed forward, his face creased with worry. "Bethany, are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Uncle James," she assured him as Owen helped her dismount. Her legs buckled slightly as they touched the ground, and Owen caught her elbow to steady her. "Just a bit shaken." Owen could feel her trembling now that the ordeal was over, the adrenaline fading from her system. He kept his hand under her elbow as they walked Storm to the corral. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite her exhaustion. "Did I pass your test, Owen Calloway?" He studied her face, flushed from exertion, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, eyes bright with the aftermath of danger and triumph. Something shifted in his chest, a loosening of the tight control he maintained over his emotions. "You passed," he conceded, "though I'm still not convinced taking you on the drive is a good idea." "Of course it isn't," she replied, surprising him. "It's impractical, potentially dangerous, and absolutely improper. But it's also right." "How do you figure that?" "Because sometimes we need to do the unexpected thing to remember we're alive." She looked up at him, something vulnerable and honest in her expression. "Don't you ever tire of doing only what's sensible, Owen?" The question hung between them, unanswered, as Dr. Sullivan reached them and insisted on examining his niece for injuries. Owen released her elbow and stepped back, watching as she assured her uncle she was fine, just sore. Owen turned to Storm, running a hand down the stallion's powerful neck. "Traitor," he murmured to the horse, "you were supposed to discourage her." Instead, Bethany Hayes had only proven herself more capable, more determined, and far more dangerous to Owen's peace of mind than he'd initially feared. And now he was bound by his word to allow her at least the first leg of the cattle drive. A day and a night in close company with a woman who made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. The preparations for the cattle drive intensified over the next 2 days. Owen threw himself into the work, partly to ensure everything was properly arranged and partly to avoid thinking too much about Bethany's upcoming participation. He had hoped she might reconsider after her experience with Storm, but if anything, the incident seemed to have strengthened her resolve. "She's checking supplies with Mrs. Winters now," Jasper reported on the evening before their departure. "Making sure we've got enough coffee and flour to last to Helena and back. Smart girl." "She's only coming as far as the first camp," Owen reminded him. "Peters will escort her back tomorrow evening." Jasper gave him a knowing look. "If you say so, boss." "I do say so," Owen said firmly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you know something I don't." The foreman chuckled. "Just observing that plans have a way of changing out on the trail, especially when strong-willed folks are involved." Owen scowled but didn't argue further. There was no point trying to explain to Jasper that his reluctance to have Bethany on the drive had nothing to do with her capabilities, which she'd proven beyond doubt, and everything to do with his own unsettling reactions to her presence. That evening, the ranch hands gathered around a bonfire to share a final hearty meal before the drive. The mood was festive, with Jackson playing his harmonica and the others swapping exaggerated stories of past drives. Owen sat slightly apart, watching the flames dance while mentally reviewing the route and potential challenges they might face. "Is this seat taken?" Bethany's voice broke into his thoughts as she indicated the log beside him. Owen glanced up, momentarily caught off guard by how the firelight cast a warm glow on her features. She'd changed back into a dress for the evening, a simple calico in deep blue that somehow made her eyes seem darker. "It's all yours," he replied, shifting to make room. She sat gracefully, balancing a plate of Mrs. Winter's stew. "Are you worried about the drive?" she asked after a moment. "Cautious," he corrected. "A good trail boss considers all possibilities. Like sudden storms, river crossings too high to ford, rustlers." She took a bite of stew, watching him with evident interest. All of those, yes. Owen found himself studying the way the firelight caught in her honey-blonde hair. The weather looks favorable for now, but that can change quickly. The little Snake River might be high from the spring melt. And there have been reports of rustling activity near the territorial border. It sounds dangerous, she observed. It can be, he agreed, wondering if she was having second thoughts. But instead of concern, he saw excitement kindle in her eyes. How many men have you lost on previous drives? The direct question startled a laugh from him. None, thank God. We've had injuries, broken bones, concussions when men have been thrown from horses, but no deaths. That speaks well of your leadership, she said. Uncle James says you're known as one of the most careful trail bosses in the territory. Owen shifted uncomfortably at the praise. Your uncle talks too much. He observes, she corrected gently, as do I, her gaze returned to the fire. You've built something remarkable here, Owen, not just the ranch, but the loyalty of your men. They respect you. I pay them fairly and don't ask them to take foolish risks, he said with a shrug. That's all it takes. Bethany shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. No, it isn't. They follow you because you care about their welfare, even if you're too stubborn to admit you care about anything at all. Before Owen could formulate a response to this uncomfortably accurate observation, Jackson called for Bethany to join the group around the fire. Apparently word of her singing ability had reached the hands. Another time, perhaps, she said, rising from the log. She paused, looking down at him with that direct gaze that never failed to unsettle him. For what it's worth, Owen, I think there's more tenderness in you than you're willing to acknowledge. And that's not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. She walked away before he could respond, joining the men around the fire. Soon her clear soprano rose in a familiar folk song, the sweet notes carrying on the evening air. Owen remained where he was, her words echoing in his mind. Tenderness. The very idea was dangerous out here, where survival depended on strength and clear-headed decisions. Tenderness got people killed. It made them take risks for others, make promises they couldn't keep, build dreams on shifting sand. Yet as he watched Bethany sing, her face animated in the firelight, Owen felt something inside him soften almost against his will. She represented everything he'd taught himself to avoid: hope, connection, the possibility of loss. But in this moment, with her voice rising toward the star-filled Montana sky, he couldn't remember why he'd fought so hard against those things in the first place. The cattle drive began at dawn the next morning. The hands moved efficiently, having done this many times before, guiding the 300 head of cattle from the home pasture toward the trail that would take them northeast to Helena. Owen rode at the front, occasionally dropping back to check the progress or address issues as they arose. Bethany rode near the chuck wagon, having been instructed to stay well away from the main herd. She had changed back into her practical trousers and wore a man's shirt with the sleeves rolled up, her hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. Owen had to admit she looked the part of a trail hand, if a decidedly more appealing one than his weathered cowboys. The morning passed without incident. The cattle moved well, the weather held clear, and they made good time across the rolling grasslands. By midday, Owen allowed himself to think they might actually reach their planned campsite with daylight to spare. Then Jackson rode up from the rear, his horse lathered from a hard ride. "Boss, riders coming up behind us, 6, maybe 7 men moving fast." Owen felt his gut tighten. Friendly. Can't tell yet. They're still too far back. Get Peters and Harris, have them fall back and keep an eye on our visitors. If they keep coming at that pace, it's not for a social call. Jackson nodded and rode off to relay the orders. Owen scanned the landscape, looking for defensible positions if things went badly. They were in open country, the nearest shelter a copse of trees along a creek bed about a mile ahead. He spurred his horse toward the chuck wagon. "Jasper, we've got company coming. Could be trouble. Get to that creek bed up ahead and set up there." The old foreman nodded grimly. "What about the girl?" Owen glanced at Bethany, who was watching their exchange with alert eyes. "She goes with you. Keep her out of sight if there's trouble." "I can help," Bethany protested. "By staying alive," Owen said sharply. "These could be rustlers, Bethany. They won't hesitate to shoot a woman." She looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in his expression must have convinced her of the seriousness of the situation. She nodded reluctantly and helped Jasper urge the wagon horses to a faster pace. Owen rode back toward the main herd, signaling to his men to keep the cattle moving toward the creek bed. If there was going to be trouble, he wanted as much natural cover as possible. 20 tense minutes later, the approaching riders came into clear view. Owen counted 7 men, all armed, riding hard toward the herd. He positioned himself with 3 of his hands at the rear of the cattle, rifles ready but not yet raised. "Hold steady," he called to his men. "Let's see what they want before we start shooting." The riders slowed as they approached, clearly assessing the situation. Their leader, a hard-faced man with a scar running along his jaw, raised his hand in greeting that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," the man called. "Fine herd you got there." "It suits our purposes," Owen replied neutrally. "Something we can help you with." "Maybe," the leader's gaze swept over the cattle. "We're looking for strays, lost a small herd in a storm last week, thought some might have joined up with passing cattle." It was a plausible story, but Owen didn't believe it for a second. These men weren't ranchers. Their mismatched gear and hungry expressions marked them as drifters at best, outlaws at worst. "Haven't seen any strays," Owen said, "but you're welcome to ride the perimeter and look for your brand. Just keep your distance from my men and cattle." The leader's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Much obliged, we'll just have a quick look." He signaled to his men, and they spread out along the edges of the herd. Owen watched them carefully, noting how they studied not just the cattle but the defenses and number of hands. "They're counting us," Jackson muttered beside him, "sizing us up." "I know," Owen replied quietly. "We're outnumbered, but they don't know about Peters and Harris up ahead, or Jasper at the creek." "What's the play, boss?" "Let them look. They won't try anything in broad daylight if they think we're prepared. They'll wait until camp, try to catch us sleeping." Jackson nodded grimly. What about Miss Hayes? A cold knot formed in Owen's stomach at the thought of Bethany, potentially in the middle of a firefight. "We need to get her away from here before nightfall. You'll take her back to the ranch once we make camp." "She won't like that." "I don't care what she likes," Owen said firmly. "I'm not risking her life because she wants an adventure." They continued moving the herd toward the creek bed, the strangers riding alongside, occasionally cutting into the mass of cattle ostensibly looking for their strays. Owen could feel their leader watching him, assessing, planning. As they approached the creek, Owen was relieved to see Jasper had positioned the wagon in a defensible spot, partially sheltered by trees and with clear sight lines in all directions. Bethany was nowhere in sight. Hopefully, the old foreman had convinced her to take cover. "This looks like a good spot to make camp," the scarred leader observed as they reached the creek. "You folks settling in for the night?" "That's the plan," Owen replied, keeping his tone casual though every nerve was on alert. "You're welcome to water your horses downstream before you move on." The man's eyes narrowed slightly at the implied dismissal. "Mighty hospitable, we might just do that." He signaled to his men and they rode off toward the lower bend of the creek. As soon as they were out of earshot, Owen gathered his hands. "They'll be back after dark. Jackson, get Peters and Harris back here. Simmons, move the chuck wagon closer to those rocks for better cover. Johnson, you're on first watch. I want eyes on those men at all times." The hands dispersed to their tasks, experienced enough to understand the gravity of the situation without further explanation. Owen dismounted and headed for the chuck wagon, needing to find Bethany and make arrangements for her immediate return to the ranch. He found her helping Jasper unpack cooking supplies, her face flushed from exertion but her movements efficient. "Bethany," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you." She looked up, reading his expression instantly. "Those men mean trouble, don't they?" "Yes," he said simply, seeing no point in sugarcoating the situation. "Which is why you're going back to the ranch with Jackson as soon as we've eaten." Her brow furrowed, but... "This isn't a discussion," Owen cut her off. "We're outnumbered and there's likely to be violence tonight. I need my men focused on protecting the herd, not worrying about your safety." "I can handle a rifle," she said, her chin lifting in that now familiar gesture of determination. "I don't doubt it," Owen replied, surprised to find he meant it. "But this isn't about your capabilities. It's about my responsibility. I shouldn't have agreed to let you come in the first place." "Owen," she said, stepping closer and lowering her voice. I understand your concern, truly, but sending me back with Jackson means one less man to defend the herd. Better that then, he stopped abruptly, unwilling to voice the alternative. Then what, she pressed, than having me injured? Or is it that you don't want to be responsible if something happens to me? Both, he admitted. I've already lost too many people. He broke off again, startled by what he'd almost revealed. Bethany's eyes widened slightly. People you what, Owen? He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. People I was responsible for. I see. Something in her tone made him look back at her. There was disappointment there, but also understanding. Very well. I'll go back with Jackson if that's what you think is best. Her ready acquiescence should have relieved him. Instead, it left him feeling oddly hollow. It is, he said, more firmly than necessary. Get your things together. You'll leave after we eat. She nodded and turned back to her task, her shoulders straight but somehow diminished. Owen walked away, telling himself this was the right decision, the only decision that made sense. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was once again choosing the safety of isolation over the risk of connection, and this time, the cost seemed higher than ever before. The men ate quickly and in relative silence, all too aware of the coming confrontation. Owen positioned lookouts to keep watch on the strangers, who had made camp about a half-mile downstream, close enough to strike quickly when darkness fell. As the sun began to set, turning the western sky to fire, Owen sought out Jackson to give him final instructions for escorting Bethany back to the ranch. Ride hard and don't stop until you reach Circle C, he told the young cowhand. Take the north route. It's longer but less likely to be watched if these men have friends in the area. Yes, boss, Jackson nodded seriously. What if we run into trouble? Use your judgment. Bethany's safety is your priority. Owen clasped the younger man's shoulder. I'm trusting you with something important here, Jackson. I understand, sir. The cowhand's chest puffed slightly at the responsibility. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Owen turned to where Bethany was preparing her horse, her movements deliberate and controlled. Are you ready? Yes, she finished tightening the saddle girth and turned to face him. In the fading light, her features seemed softer, more vulnerable than he'd seen them before. Owen, please be careful tonight. I've handled worse, he assured her, though in truth, the odds weren't in their favor if the rustlers decided to attack in force. I'm sure you have, she hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm briefly. Thank you for allowing me this much of the drive. It meant more than you know. The simple contact and the sincerity in her voice stirred something in Owen he'd thought long buried. For a moment, he considered telling her to stay, that they would face whatever came together. But that was foolishness born of sentiment, and sentiment got people killed out here. You'll have other adventures, he said instead, safer ones. A sad smile touched her lips, perhaps. Though I'm beginning to think the greatest adventures aren't about places or events at all, but about people. The ones who challenge us to be more than we believe we can be. Before Owen could respond to this cryptic statement, a shout came from the perimeter. Riders approaching, at least 10 of them. Owen's head snapped up. They've brought reinforcements, he muttered. Then to Bethany, go now, Jackson, get her out of here. He didn't wait to see them off, already running toward his rifle and calling orders to his men. Simmons, get those cattle bunched by the creek. Peters, Harris, defensive positions behind the rocks. Jasper, bring the wagon around for cover. The hands scrambled to obey as the thunder of approaching hooves grew louder. Owen grabbed his Winchester and took position behind a large boulder, quickly assessing their situation. The rustlers had indeed brought friends. He counted 12 riders now, spread out in an attack formation. The first shots came as darkness fell, sharp cracks that sent birds scattering from the trees. Owen returned fire methodically, aiming for horses rather than riders when possible. A wounded horse would stop an attacker more effectively than a wounded man who might still keep fighting. The skirmish intensified quickly, bullets whining off rocks and splintering tree bark. Owen's men held their positions well, their disciplined fire keeping the rustlers at bay for the moment. But ammunition wouldn't last forever, and darkness would eventually favor the attackers who could move under its cover. Boss. Jasper called from nearby. We got more trouble. 3 riders circled around behind us, heading after Jackson and the girl. Cold dread washed through Owen. He had sent Bethany and Jackson directly into danger. "Who can we spare?" he shouted back. "Nobody," the foreman replied grimly. "We're barely holding here as it is." Owen cursed, calculating rapidly. If he went after Bethany, he'd be leaving his men short-handed in an already desperate situation. If he stayed, she and Jackson might be caught by the rustlers, an outcome too terrible to contemplate. It wasn't really a choice at all. "Jasper, you're in charge," Owen called, already moving toward his horse, which was tethered nearby. "Hold them as long as you can. If it gets too bad, let them have the damn cattle. Men are worth more than steers." "What about you?" the old foreman demanded. "I'm going after them." Owen swung into the saddle, checking that his rifle was secure in its scabbard. "Alone, that's suicide, boy." "Maybe," Owen gathered the reins, "but some things are worth the risk." He spurred his horse away from the protection of the camp, keeping low in the saddle as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Once clear of the immediate firefight, he urged the animal to greater speed, following the route he knew Jackson would have taken with Bethany. The night was clear, the stars and half-moon providing just enough light to make out the trail. Owen rode hard, his mind filled with images of what might happen if the rustlers caught up to Bethany. These weren't men who would show mercy to a woman, especially one who could identify them later. After what seemed like hours but was likely only 20 minutes of hard riding, Owen heard gunfire ahead, 3 shots in rapid succession, then silence. He redoubled his pace, heart hammering against his ribs. Cresting a small rise, he saw them in the moonlight, 2 riders stationary on the trail, a third figure on the ground nearby. Even from a distance, Owen recognized Jackson's horse, which meant the fallen figure was almost certainly the young cowhand. And the second rider, still mounted, was Bethany. One of the rustlers was approaching her, his gun drawn. The other was checking Jackson, probably making sure he was dead or at least no longer a threat. Neither had noticed Owen's approach yet. He dismounted quickly, moving forward on foot to get within effective rifle range. At this distance, in this light, he couldn't risk a shot that might hit Bethany instead of her attackers. Drawing closer, he could hear voices now. "A pretty little thing," one rustler was saying. "Boss'll want to question her about the cattle operation, but after that, maybe we can have some fun." "I'd rather die," Bethany's voice came clearly through the night air, steady and defiant despite what must have been terror. "That can be arranged too, sweetheart," the man laughed, "but not before." Owen had heard enough. He raised his rifle and fired, hitting the rustler nearest Jackson. The man crumpled without a sound. The second rustler whirled, firing wildly in Owen's direction. Owen dropped to one knee, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger again. The shot struck true. The second rustler clutched his chest and fell backward off his horse, which bolted into the darkness. "Bethany," Owen called, running forward now. "Are you hurt?" "Owen," her voice broke with relief. "I'm all right, but Jackson." Owen reached them, quickly checking the fallen cowhand. Jackson was alive but unconscious, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. "He'll live," Owen said, pulling a bandana from his pocket to press against the injury. "What happened?" "They came out of nowhere," Bethany explained, dismounting to help with Jackson. "They were waiting on the trail. Jackson tried to get me to run while he held them off, but I couldn't just leave him." Owen glanced up sharply. "You stayed deliberately." "Of course I stayed," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He was protecting me. I couldn't abandon him." There was no fear in her voice now, only determination and concern for the injured man. Owen stared at her in the moonlight, this woman who had defied his expectations at every turn, who had remained when most would have fled, who was now calmly helping tend a wounded man despite having just faced death herself. "We need to get him back to the ranch," Owen said finally. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "But what about your men, the rustlers?" "Jasper can handle it. Right now, Jackson needs a doctor, and you need to be somewhere safe." "And you," she asked softly, "what do you need, Owen?" The question caught him off guard, as did the realization that the answer had changed fundamentally in the last hour. What he needed wasn't solitude or the safety of emotional distance. What he needed was kneeling beside him in the Montana dirt, her hands steady as she helped tend a wounded man, her courage outshining the stars overhead. But this wasn't the time or place for such revelations. "I need to know you're safe," he said simply, "both of you." Together, they managed to get Jackson onto his horse, with Owen mounting behind to keep the injured man secure. Bethany rode alongside, alert for any sign of further danger as they made their way slowly back toward the Circle C. The journey took twice as long as it should have, given Jackson's condition and the need for caution. Dawn was breaking by the time the ranch buildings came into view, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Mrs. Winters came running at their approach, her face creased with worry. "Thank the Lord. We've been worried sick since we saw the fire." "Fire?" Owen reined his exhausted horse to a stop. "What fire?" The older woman pointed northeast, where a column of dark smoke was visible against the brightening sky. "Started a few hours ago. We feared the whole range might be burning." Owen felt his stomach drop. The smoke was coming from the direction of their camp, where Jasper and the others were still holding off the rustlers, or had been when he left. "Take care of Jackson," he instructed Mrs. Winters, carefully lowering the semi-conscious cowhand from the saddle. "He's been shot, but the bleeding's mostly stopped. Clean the wound and keep him comfortable until we can get Doc Sullivan out here." "What about the others?" Bethany asked, dismounting beside him. "Owen, that smoke." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, torn between his duty to his injured hand and his responsibility to the men still facing danger. "I need to go back. Jasper and the others could be in serious trouble." "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "Absolutely not," Owen replied. "You've been through enough already. Stay here with Mrs. Winters and Jackson." "No," the single word carried such conviction that Owen blinked in surprise. "You're outnumbered, exhausted, and riding an equally tired horse. You need help, Owen, whether you're willing to admit it or not." "It's too dangerous," he insisted. "Life is dangerous," she countered, "especially out here, but that doesn't mean we face it alone." Owen looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the Eastern girl who had arrived on his ranch just days ago, but a woman who had proven her courage and determination time and again. A woman who understood that survival sometimes meant taking risks for those who mattered. "Take a fresh horse," he said finally, "and stay close to me." Her smile was brief but brilliant, like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Always." An hour later, they approached the creek where Owen had left his men. The smoke was thicker now, obscuring visibility, but as they drew closer, Owen could see that it wasn't the grassland burning, but the chuck wagon and several deliberately set fires around the perimeter of what had been their camp. "A signal," he muttered, understanding dawning. "Jasper set those fires as a signal." They rode cautiously forward, alert for any sign of danger or survivors. The camp was eerily quiet, no sign of men or cattle. "Owen, look," Bethany pointed to a figure emerging from the smoke, rifle in hand. "That's Harris," Owen said with relief, recognizing his ranch hand. "Harris, over here." The cowboy turned, his soot-stained face breaking into a weary grin when he recognized Owen. "Boss, thank God, we thought you might not make it." "What happened?" Owen demanded as they reached him. "Where's Jasper, the others, the cattle?" "All safe," Harris reported. "After you left, the rustlers pressed us hard. We were about to be overrun when a patrol of cavalry showed up. They'd seen the gunfire from the road to Fort Ellis. Rustlers scattered like quail. Jasper took the herd and the other boys on to Helena while I stayed behind to wait for you." "Cavalry?" Owen repeated, stunned by this unexpected turn of events. "What were they doing out this way?" "Escorting the new territorial governor's representatives," Harris explained. "Lucky timing for us. They went after the rustlers, caught 4 of them already, according to the lieutenant who stayed behind with me for a while." Owen shook his head, hardly able to believe their good fortune. "And the fires?" "Jasper's idea. Wanted to make sure you could find your way back to us if you made it this far. He figured you'd come looking once you got the girl to safety." Harris glanced at Bethany then, seeming to notice her presence for the first time. "Begging your pardon, Miss Hayes. Didn't expect to see you back here." "Mr. Calloway couldn't talk me out of coming," she replied with a slight smile. "I can be quite stubborn when necessary." "So I've noticed," Owen murmured, earning a quick glance from Bethany. "What now, boss?" Harris asked. "Jasper said to tell you they'd hold up at Baker's Creek tonight if you wanted to catch up." Owen considered their options. Baker's Creek was a good day's ride from their current position, and both he and Bethany were already exhausted. Jackson needed medical attention beyond what Mrs. Winters could provide, and the rustlers, though scattered, might still pose a threat. "We'll head back to the ranch," he decided. "Get Jackson proper care, rest the horses, and catch up with Jasper tomorrow. He knows the route well enough to manage without us for a while longer." Harris nodded, clearly relieved at not having to ride further today. "What about Miss Hayes, still sending her back to town?" Owen glanced at Bethany, who was watching him with those steady brown eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. "That's up to Miss Hayes," he said finally. "She's earned the right to make that decision herself." Surprise and something warmer flickered across her face. "I'd like to continue to Helena," she said, "if that's still possible." "It's possible," Owen confirmed. "And probably inevitable, given your determination." Her smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Thank you, Owen." As they rode back toward the Circle C, Owen found himself watching Bethany more than the trail ahead. She rode straight back despite her exhaustion, her face bearing smudges of dirt and a small cut along one cheek that he hadn't noticed before. Yet there was a quiet dignity in her bearing, a strength that had nothing to do with physical power and everything to do with character. He realized, with a clarity that was both frightening and exhilarating, that his carefully constructed defenses were crumbling in the face of this remarkable woman. The walls he had built to protect himself from loss were proving useless against the simple truth of Bethany Hayes's courage and compassion. For the first time in years, Owen Calloway was facing the possibility that isolation wasn't the answer, that perhaps connection, with all its risks and vulnerabilities, was worth the danger after all. And that realization was more terrifying than any rustler's gun. Dr. Sullivan arrived at the Circle C the following afternoon, responding to the urgent message Owen had sent upon their return. The doctor examined Jackson's wound, declared it painful but not life-threatening, and prescribed rest and careful monitoring for signs of infection. "He was fortunate," Sullivan told Owen as they stood on the porch after the examination. "An inch to the left, and that bullet would have pierced his lung." "Will he recover fully?" Owen asked, concerned for the young cowhand who had shown such courage. "With proper care and time, yes," the doctor assured him. "Though he won't be riding with any cattle drives for at least a month." Owen nodded, relief washing through him. Another death on his conscience would have been unbearable, especially when he had been the one to send Jackson and Bethany into danger. "And Bethany?" Sullivan asked, his shrewd gaze assessing Owen. "I understand she was in considerable danger as well." "She was," Owen acknowledged, "but she handled herself with remarkable courage, your niece is." "Not what I expected, Doctor." A smile creased Sullivan's weathered face. "Few people are once we take the time to truly know them." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "She speaks very highly of you, you know." Owen shifted uncomfortably. "She's kind." "She's perceptive," Sullivan corrected. "Bethany has always had a gift for seeing what others miss, the true character beneath the surface that people present to the world." "And what does she see in me?" Owen found himself asking before he could think better of it. The doctor's expression softened. "That, my friend, is a question you should ask her directly." He glanced toward the house, where Bethany could be seen through the window, helping Mrs. Winters prepare supper, though I suspect you already know the answer. Owen followed his gaze, watching as Bethany laughed at something the older woman said, her face animated in the late afternoon light streaming through the window. There was a lightness to her movements, a joy that seemed at odds with the dangers she had so recently faced. "We'll be leaving for Helena tomorrow," Owen said, changing the subject. "To catch up with the cattle drive." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "You're still taking Bethany along then?" "If she still wants to go," Owen replied. "After everything that's happened, I wouldn't blame her for preferring to stay here until you return from town." "Oh, I think you'll find she's quite determined to continue the journey," the doctor said with another knowing smile. "Bethany has never been one to leave things unfinished, whether it's a cattle drive or other matters of importance." Before Owen could ask what other matters Sullivan was referring to, the doctor excused himself to check on Jackson once more before supper. Owen remained on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. His mind was a tangle of conflicting emotions. Relief that Jackson would recover, concern for Jasper and the others continuing the drive, and beneath it all, a growing awareness that his feelings for Bethany Hayes had moved well beyond reluctant admiration into territory he had avoided for years. He was still standing there when Bethany herself came to announce that supper was ready. She had cleaned up since their return, her hair freshly braided and falling over one shoulder. The cut on her cheek had been treated, though a small bruise was developing beside it. "You look lost in thought," she observed, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "Just considering our next steps," he replied. "Jasper and the men are continuing to Helena with the herd. They'll reach Baker's Creek tonight." "And us?" she asked. There was something careful in her tone, as if she were trying not to assume too much. "If you still want to continue the journey, we can leave tomorrow morning," Owen said. "It's a hard ride, but we could catch up to them by nightfall." "I'd like that," she said simply. Owen turned to face her fully. "Bethany, after everything that's happened, the stampede, the rustlers, Jackson's injury, no one would think less of you for staying here until your uncle returns from town." She met his gaze steadily. "Is that what you want me to do, Owen? Stay behind?" The question hung between them, weighted with meanings beyond the simple words. Owen found himself unable to give the answer that would have come so easily just days before. "I want you to be safe," he said finally. "Safety isn't always found in avoiding danger," she replied softly. "Sometimes it's found in facing it alongside those who matter to us." "Is that what I am to you?" Owen asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. "Someone who matters." Her expression softened, vulnerability and courage mingling in her gaze. "You know you are. The question is whether I matter to you enough to risk the comfort of your carefully ordered life." The directness of her question struck Owen like a physical blow. Part of him wanted to retreat behind the walls that had protected him for so long, to give the safe answer that would keep the emotional distance he had maintained with everyone since his father's death. But another part, a part that had been silent for years but was growing stronger by the hour, urged him toward honesty. "You matter," he admitted, the words feeling strange and powerful on his tongue. "More than I expected, more than I wanted to allow." Something like hope bloomed in her eyes. "And does that frighten you, Owen Calloway?" "Terrifies me," he confessed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But I'm beginning to think some fears are worth facing." Her answering smile was radiant, warming him more effectively than the last rays of the setting sun. "Then I believe we have a cattle drive to catch tomorrow," she said, "and perhaps some other journeys to begin as well." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, then misses. Winters called again from inside, breaking the spell. "We should go in," Bethany said, though she made no move to leave. "We should," Owen agreed, equally stationary. Finally, in a gesture that felt both impulsive and inevitable, he offered her his arm. "Miss Hayes, would you allow me to escort you to supper?" Her smile deepened as she placed her hand on his forearm. "I would be delighted, Mr. Calloway." It was a small step, this formal gesture in the informal setting of his ranch. But as they walked inside together, Owen felt as though something fundamental had shifted, as if a door long closed was beginning, just barely, to open. They departed for Baker's Creek at dawn the next morning, riding hard through terrain Owen knew well. Bethany kept pace without complaint, proving once again that her determination was matched by genuine capability. They spoke little during the journey, focused on covering ground, but the silence between them felt comfortable rather than strained. By mid-afternoon, they spotted the dust cloud that marked the location of the herd, moving slowly across the rolling grassland. As they drew closer, Owen could make out Jasper riding point, with the other hands spread out around the cattle. "Owen," Jasper called when they were within hailing distance, "thought you might not catch up until tomorrow." "We made good time," Owen replied, reining his horse alongside the foreman's. "Any trouble since we parted?" "Smooth as silk," Jasper reported. "Cavalry's been patrolling the area. Seems those rustlers have been causing trouble all through this section of the territory. They're mighty interested in catching the rest of the gang." "Good," Owen scanned the herd, noting with approval that the cattle looked calm and were moving well. "Harris filled me in on what happened after I left, quick thinking with those fires." Jasper shrugged modestly. "Figured you'd come looking once you got Jackson and Miss Hayes to safety." His gaze shifted to Bethany, surprise evident in his weathered features. "Speaking of which, Miss Hayes decided to continue to Helena," Owen explained, aware of the speculation in the old foreman's eyes. She's proven she can handle herself on the trail. So I heard, Jasper said with a nod to Bethany. Harris told us how you stayed with Jackson instead of running. That took courage, Miss Hayes. I couldn't leave him, she replied simply, not when he was trying to protect me. Jasper's gaze moved between her and Owen, something knowing in his expression. Well, we're glad to have you both back. We'll make camp at Cottonwood Spring tonight. Should reach Helena by midday tomorrow if all goes well. The remainder of the drive proceeded without incident. The cavalry's presence in the area seemed to have discouraged any further attempts by the rustlers, and the weather remained clear and mild. They made camp that evening by a small spring surrounded by cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze. After a hearty meal prepared by Simmons, who had taken over cooking duties in the absence of the chuck wagon, most of the hands turned in early, exhausted from the day's work. Owen remained by the fire, going over the sales contracts for the cattle one more time. They would fetch a good price in Helena, enough to cover the ranch's expenses for the coming months, with some left over for improvements he had been planning. He was so absorbed in his calculations that he didn't immediately notice Bethany's approach until she sat beside him on the fallen log serving as a bench. "Am I interrupting?" she asked. Owen set aside the papers. "Not at all, just reviewing the contracts for tomorrow." "Will it be a good sale?" she asked, genuine interest in her voice. "Very good if all goes as planned." He gestured to the sleeping cattle. "Beef prices are high this season, and these are prime stock." "You've built something remarkable," Bethany observed, looking around the camp and beyond to the herd. "Not just the ranch and the cattle, but the loyalty of your men. They respect you enormously." Owen shifted, uncomfortable with the praise. "They're good men, hard workers." "It's more than that," she persisted gently. "They follow you because they trust your judgment, your character. That kind of loyalty isn't bought with wages." "Perhaps," Owen conceded, "though I suspect you give me more credit than I deserve." "Or perhaps you give yourself less than you've earned," she countered, her gaze steady in the firelight. Owen looked away, still unaccustomed to the directness of her observations. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire and the occasional lowing of cattle the only sounds in the night. "What will you do in Helena?" he asked finally. "Will you stay with your uncle permanently?" Bethany considered the question. "I'm not certain. Uncle James needs help with his practice, certainly, but beyond that," she shrugged slightly. "I suppose I'm still finding my place out here." "The territory can be hard on newcomers," Owen said, "especially those used to Eastern comforts." "I'm more adaptable than I appear," she replied with a small smile. "And there's something honest about the West that appeals to me. People here are judged by their actions, not their family connections or social standing." "True enough," Owen agreed, "though it can be an unforgiving place too." "Life is unforgiving everywhere," she said softly. "I nursed my parents through influenza, watched them fade a little more each day despite everything I tried. The East held no particular mercy in that regard." The pain in her voice was controlled but unmistakable. Owen found himself wanting to offer comfort, though he had little practice in such matters. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "about your parents." "Thank you," she gazed into the fire, its light reflecting in her eyes. "My father was a practical man, but he had dreams too. He always talked about seeing the West, about the open spaces and the possibilities. In a way, coming here was as much for him as for myself." "And your mother?" A sad smile touched Bethany's lips. "She was a musician, taught piano to the children of Philadelphia's elite. She believed in beauty even in difficult circumstances. 'Find something beautiful every day,' she used to tell me. Even if it's just the way light falls through a window or the sound of rain on the roof." "Good advice," Owen said, "though not always easy to follow out here." "I don't know," Bethany replied, her gaze lifting to the star-filled sky above. "There seems to be beauty and abundance, if one is willing to see it." Owen followed her gaze upward, where the Milky Way stretched across the heavens in a glittering band. It was a view he had seen thousands of times, yet rarely truly noticed anymore. "I suppose you're right," he admitted, "though sometimes familiar sights become invisible to us." "Unless someone helps us see them anew," she said, her eyes meeting his once more. The implication in her words was clear. Owen felt a curious tightening in his chest, a mixture of apprehension and something warmer. "Bethany," he began, uncertain what he meant to say but feeling that something needed to be acknowledged between them. "It's all right," she said before he could continue. "You don't need to say anything, Owen. I know this is unexpected for you, for both of us, really." "Very unexpected," he agreed, running a hand through his hair. "A week ago, you weren't even part of my world. And now?" The simple question demanded an honest answer. Owen looked at her, really looked at her, in the flickering firelight. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its braid in places, framing a face that combined strength and gentleness in equal measure. Her eyes held a question but also patience. She would wait for his answer, however long it took. "Now," he said slowly, "I find it difficult to imagine my world without you in it. And that terrifies me more than any rustler's gun." Something softened in her expression, because caring means risking loss. Yes, the admission came more easily than he expected. "I've lost everyone I ever loved, Bethany. My mother to childbirth fever when I was young, my father to rustler's bullets, even my sister who moved back east and hasn't written in 3 years. Each time it nearly destroyed me." "So you decided it was safer not to love at all," she concluded. "To build walls around your heart the way you built fences around your ranch." "It seemed the most sensible course," he said, "until you arrived and started questioning everything I thought I knew." She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her features and made his heart beat faster. "Questioning assumptions is a specialty of mine, I'm afraid. My father always said I was born asking why and never quite stopped." "He sounds like a wise man," Owen said, returning her smile with a small one of his own. "He was." Bethany's expression grew more serious. "He also taught me that a life without connection isn't really living at all, it's just existing. And that sometimes the very things that scare us most are the ones most worth pursuing." She rose then, smoothing her skirts. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Owen nodded, aware that something important had passed between them, something that couldn't be undone or ignored. "Good night, Bethany." "Good night, Owen," she replied softly. "And thank you for listening, for seeing me as I am, not just as an Eastern girl out of her depth." "I think we're both seeing more clearly now," he said. Her smile was the last thing he saw before she turned away, walking toward the small tent they had set up for her privacy. Owen remained by the fire long after she had gone, staring into the flames and contemplating the walls that had protected him for so long, and wondering if they were now becoming a prison rather than a refuge. They reached Helena shortly after noon the next day, driving the cattle into the stockyards on the outskirts of the growing territorial capital. The sale went smoothly, the buyer impressed with the quality of the herd and willing to pay Owen's asking price with minimal haggling. With business concluded and the cattle delivered, Owen paid his men their shares and gave them 2 days' liberty in town before the return journey to the Circle C. Most headed immediately for the nearest saloon, their pockets heavy with well-earned wages. Dr. Sullivan met them at his modest home near the center of town, clearly delighted to see his niece safe and well despite the dangers she had faced. "Bethany, thank God," he exclaimed, embracing her tightly. "When I heard about the rustlers, I feared the worst." "I'm fine, Uncle James," she assured him, returning his embrace. "Thanks in large part to Mr. Calloway's protection." Sullivan turned to Owen with genuine gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for keeping her safe, Owen. I should never have imposed on you the way I did." "No imposition," Owen replied automatically, though he was acutely aware of how drastically his life had changed since Bethany's arrival at the Circle C. "Your niece proved herself more than capable on the trail." "So I've heard," the doctor said with a proud glance at Bethany. "The cavalry lieutenant who came through town yesterday mentioned a young woman who refused to abandon a wounded man despite danger to herself. I had a feeling he was talking about my Bethany." She colored slightly at the praise. "Jackson was the truly brave one. He was willing to sacrifice himself for my safety." "And you for his," Owen added quietly. "Courage seems to be contagious in your presence, Miss Hayes." The warmth in her eyes at his words made something flutter in Owen's chest. Sullivan glanced between them, a knowing expression crossing his features. "Well," the doctor said after a moment, "you must both be exhausted. Please come in and rest. I've arranged rooms for you at the Hotel Owen, but perhaps you'd join us for supper first, to properly celebrate the successful drive and Bethany's safe arrival. That would be very kind, Owen accepted, realizing he was reluctant to part from Bethany's company just yet. Sullivan's home was modest but comfortable, reflecting the doctor's practical nature and limited means as he established his practice in the growing town. He showed Owen to the small parlor while Bethany went to freshen up after the journey. "You've changed, Owen," Sullivan observed once they were alone, offering him a glass of whiskey. Owen accepted the drink but raised an eyebrow at the comment. "Have I?" The doctor sipped his own whiskey thoughtfully. "There's something different about you, a lightness that wasn't there before. I've been treating you for minor injuries and ailments for 3 years now, and this is the first time I've seen you look unburdened." Owen shifted uncomfortably under the perceptive gaze. "It's been an eventful week." "Indeed," Sullivan studied him over the rim of his glass. "My niece has that effect on people, you know. She brings light into dark places, often without even realizing she's doing it." "She's a remarkable woman," Owen acknowledged, careful to keep his tone neutral despite the warmth that spread through him at the mere mention of Bethany. "Yes, she is," Sullivan agreed. "She's also been through considerable pain and loss in her young life. Her capacity for joy despite that, her willingness to keep her heart open, is perhaps her greatest strength." Owen nodded, understanding the gentle warning beneath the doctor's words. "I have no intention of causing her further pain, Doctor." "I believe you," Sullivan said simply. "But intentions aren't always enough, Owen. Sometimes we hurt those we care about most without meaning to, simply by refusing to let them truly know us." Before Owen could respond to this uncomfortably accurate observation, Bethany returned to the parlor. She had changed into a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, her hair freshly arranged in a more formal style than she had worn on the trail. The transformation was striking. On the ranch and during the drive, Bethany had been practical, capable, determined. Here, in the more civilized setting of her uncle's home, she revealed another facet of herself, a natural grace and quiet elegance that spoke of her Eastern upbringing. Owen rose as she entered, suddenly aware of his own trail-worn appearance. "You look lovely, Miss Hayes." "Thank you," she replied with a smile, "though I think I prefer the practicality of trousers for cattle drives. Far less fussing with hems and petticoats." Her comment broke the momentary tension, and Owen found himself smiling in return. "I can't speak to the petticoat issue, but I'll take your word on the practicality." Sullivan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I see the trail hasn't diminished your forthright nature, Bethany. Come, both of you, supper should be ready. Mrs. Guthrie, my housekeeper, has prepared something special to welcome you." The meal was indeed excellent, far superior to the simple fare they had eaten on the trail. The conversation flowed easily, with Sullivan sharing news of Helena's growth and Bethany recounting sanitized versions of their journey that omitted the more dangerous moments. Throughout the evening, Owen found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Bethany. In this new setting, among the trappings of civilization, he had half expected her to seem out of place in his world. Instead, he was struck by how seamlessly she moved between environments, equally at home in a ranch kitchen, on horseback during a cattle drive, or at a formal dinner table. It was he who felt suddenly out of place, aware of his rough hands and trail-dusty clothes in the relative refinement of Sullivan's home. Yet whenever Bethany's eyes met his, that feeling of dislocation vanished, replaced by a curious sense of belonging that had nothing to do with physical surroundings. As the evening drew to a close, Sullivan excused himself to answer a late medical call, leaving Owen and Bethany alone in the small parlor. "Your uncle has a comfortable home," Owen observed, searching for neutral conversation. "Yes," she agreed, though her expression suggested her thoughts were elsewhere. "Though it feels strange to be in town again after the open spaces of your ranch." "You'll adjust," he said, then immediately regretted the words, which sounded dismissive of their shared experiences. Bethany studied him for a moment. "Will I adjust and forget, you mean?" "That's not what I meant," Owen said quickly. "Isn't it?" There was no accusation in her tone, only gentle inquiry. "You've been unusually quiet tonight, Owen. Almost as if you're already preparing to return to the isolation of your ranch and leave recent events behind." Her perception was uncanny and uncomfortable. Owen moved to the window, looking out at the darkened street, where oil lamps cast pools of yellow light at regular intervals. So different from the vast darkness of the open range, with only stars for illumination. "I don't know how to do this, Bethany," he admitted finally, still facing the window. "Whatever this is between us, I've spent years building a life that makes sense to me, practical, predictable, safe. And then you arrive, and in the space of a week, everything I thought I knew is called into question." He heard her soft footsteps as she moved to stand beside him. "Is that such a terrible thing? To question what we think we know?" "It's terrifying," he said honestly, turning to face her. "Because what if I'm wrong? What if there is something more than just survival, something worth the risk of loss and pain?" "What if there is?" she echoed softly. Her eyes held his, steady and unwavering in the lamplight. Would that be so unbearable to discover? Owen found himself unable to look away from her gaze, which seemed to see through all his carefully constructed defenses to the truth beneath. The truth he had been avoiding since the moment she smiled at him on that dusty trail. "I need to return to the Circle C tomorrow," he said, the words feeling inadequate even as he spoke them. "My men, the ranch." "Of course," she interrupted gently, "you have responsibilities." "I understand that, Owen." But there was disappointment in her eyes, a dimming of the light that had been there moments before. Owen felt its loss like a physical pain. "Bethany, he stopped, frustrated by his own inability to articulate what he was feeling. "This isn't easy for me." "I know," she said simply. "And I'm not asking for promises or declarations, Owen. I'm just asking that you don't retreat behind those walls again. That you consider the possibility that connection, even with its risks, might be worth pursuing." Before he could respond, the front door opened, signaling Sullivan's return. The moment of intimacy was broken, but the question Bethany had posed remained, hanging in the air between them like an unfinished melody. "I should go," Owen said, aware of the lateness of the hour. "The hotel." "Of course," Bethany stepped back, composing herself. Will you say goodbye before you leave tomorrow?" There was vulnerability in the question, a hint of the uncertainty beneath her usual confidence. It touched something deep within Owen, a protective instinct he had thought long dormant. "Yes," he promised, "I wouldn't leave without seeing you." Her smile returned, smaller than before but genuine. "Good. Sleep well, Owen." He bid her and Sullivan good night and walked the short distance to the hotel, his mind a tumult of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The practical part of him, the part that had kept him alive and successful in the unforgiving territory, insisted that returning to the Circle C alone was the only sensible course. The ranch needed his attention, his men depended on him, and emotional entanglements were distractions he couldn't afford. But another voice had awoken within him, one that grew stronger with each passing day in Bethany's company. It whispered that perhaps isolation wasn't strength but fear, that the walls he had built to protect himself had become a prison, that there might be a kind of courage in vulnerability that he had never allowed himself to explore. Sleep eluded him for much of the night as these competing voices battled within him. By dawn, exhaustion had brought clarity of a sort, not a resolution to his inner conflict, but at least a recognition of its true nature. He had been lying to himself for years, pretending that emotional isolation was a choice made from strength when it had really been born of fear. Fear of loss, of course, but more fundamentally, fear of his own capacity for love, a capacity so great that each previous loss had nearly destroyed him. What Bethany offered was not safety, but its opposite. The possibility of feeling deeply again, with all the risk and pain and joy that entailed. And that possibility was both the most terrifying and the most compelling thing Owen Calloway had faced in years. He rose early, washed and shaved with unusual care, and prepared to say goodbye to the woman who had upended his carefully ordered existence. Whatever he decided about their future, he owed her honesty, and perhaps, for the first time in years, he owed it to himself as well. The morning air was crisp and clear as Owen made his way back to Sullivan's house. Helena was beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, wagons rumbling along the main street laden with goods. Signs of growth were evident everywhere, new buildings under construction, more businesses than he remembered from his last visit. The territory was changing, expanding, becoming something new. Perhaps, Owen thought, it wasn't so strange that he too might be changing alongside it. He found Bethany alone in her uncle's small garden behind the house, tending to herbs and flowers with the same focused attention she brought to every task. She looked up at his approach, surprise and pleasure mingling in her expression. "Owen, you're earlier than I expected. I wanted to catch you before you might be busy with other matters," he explained, suddenly uncertain how to proceed now that the moment had arrived. She set aside her gardening tools and brushed the soil from her hands. "I'm glad you did. Uncle James was called to a difficult berth early this morning. I don't expect him back until afternoon." An awkward silence fell between them, at odds with the easy conversation they had shared during the cattle drive. Owen searched for words that might bridge the growing distance. "How does it feel to be in town after your adventure?" he asked finally. "Strange," she admitted. "Everything seems so confined after the open spaces of the trail, yet there's a comfort in it too, the routines, the civilized amenities." "Yes," Owen agreed, though he had always felt more at ease on the range than in town. "Helena has grown considerably since I was here last." "So Uncle James says." Bethany studied him for a moment, then asked directly, "When do you leave for the ranch?" "This afternoon," he replied. "The men will need another day to recover from their celebrations, but I should get back." She nodded, accepting this without argument, though something like resignation shadowed her features. "I understand. The ranch needs you." "Yes," Owen said then, with more honesty than he had intended, "and I need it. The routine, the work, it's been my anchor for so long." Of course, her smile was gentle but tinged with sadness. "We all need our anchors, Owen." He looked away, unable to bear the understanding in her gaze. "Bethany, he broke off, frustrated by his own hesitation. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" she asked quietly, expressing feelings, acknowledging what's happening between us. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I've spent years building walls, convincing myself they were necessary for survival, and then you arrived and simply walked through them as if they weren't even there." Her expression softened. "I didn't mean to disrupt your life, Owen." "I know," he said quickly. "That's part of what makes it so remarkable. You weren't trying to change me or challenge my beliefs. You were just being yourself, brave and determined and surprisingly stubborn." A small smile touched her lips at that last description. "My father always said my stubbornness would either be my greatest strength or my downfall." "I think he was right about it being a strength," Owen said. "You changed my mind about so many things, Bethany. About what women are capable of, about the value of taking risks, about—" "About what?" she prompted when he hesitated. Owen took a deep breath. "About whether it's possible to find something worth the risk of caring again, worth the possibility of loss." The hope that flickered in her eyes gave him courage to continue. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. "I only know that the thought of riding back to the Circle C without you feels wrong somehow, as if I'd be leaving something essential behind." "Owen," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I don't want to say goodbye," he interrupted, the words coming more easily now. "Not permanently. I'm saying that for the first time in years, I'm willing to consider a future that includes someone beside myself. I'm saying that you've awakened something in me I thought was dead, and I'm terrified of losing it again." Bethany's eyes shone with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. "Those are the most beautiful words anyone has ever said to me." "They're not very eloquent," Owen said, embarrassed by his own awkwardness. "They're honest," she replied simply, "and that matters far more than eloquence." She was standing very close to him now, close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her brown eyes, could catch the faint scent of lavender that always seemed to surround her. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing his earlier uncertainty. Owen considered the question, aware that his answer would set them on a path neither had anticipated when they first met. "I don't know exactly," he said truthfully. "I only know that I want to find out, with you, if you're willing." "I'm willing," she said without hesitation. "More than willing, Owen, but what about the ranch, your men, the life you've built?" "The ranch will still be there," he said, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "And I'm beginning to think it might be even more of a home, with two people building it instead of one." The implication of his words hung between them, neither willing to articulate it fully yet. but both aware of where this path might lead if they continued to follow it. "I need to help Uncle James establish his practice," Bethany said after a moment. "He's depending on me at least for a while." "Of course," Owen agreed quickly. "I wouldn't ask you to abandon your commitments. But Helena isn't so far from the Circle C I could visit, and perhaps when you're ready." "I could visit too," she finished for him, "and we could see where this leads." Yes, the relief he felt at her understanding was profound. "It won't be easy. I'm set in my ways, and the territory isn't kind to new beginnings." "Nothing worthwhile is ever easy," Bethany said, reaching out to take his hand. Her touch was warm and sure, her fingers interlacing with his as naturally as if they had been doing this for years. "But I think we've both proven we can face difficulties when necessary." Owen looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. How something as simple as this connection could simultaneously terrify and exhilarate him. "There's something else," he said, meeting her gaze once more. "Something I've wanted to do since that moment you smiled at me on the trail." Her eyes widened slightly in understanding. "What's stopping you?" "Nothing," Owen realized. "Not anymore." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative at first, but when Bethany responded by stepping closer, her free hand coming to rest against his chest, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, savoring the moment of perfect connection. "That," he said softly, "was worth every risk." Bethany's laugh was breathless and joyful. "I completely agree, Mr. Calloway, though perhaps we should verify our findings with additional research." This time their kiss held nothing of hesitation, only the promise of a future neither had imagined possible just days before. A future where walls gave way to bridges, where isolation surrendered to connection, and where a man who never believed in forever changed his mind because a brave, stubborn woman smiled at him and refused to accept his solitude as inevitable. As the summer gave way to autumn, Owen's visits to Helena became a regular occurrence, coinciding with his business in town and growing more frequent as the weeks passed. Each visit strengthened the connection between him and Bethany, their conversations ranging from practical matters of ranch management to deeper discussions of hopes and fears for the future. Dr. Sullivan observed their growing relationship with quiet approval, making himself scarce when Owen visited and offering his blessing when Bethany began making occasional trips to the Circle C, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Winters. "She's happier than I've seen her since before her parents fell ill," Sullivan told Owen during one of his visits. "You've given her something to look forward to, a sense of purpose beyond helping an old doctor with his patients." "She's given me far more," Owen replied honestly. "A reason to see beyond the next season, the next cattle drive, a future that isn't just about survival." The doctor smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "That, my friend, is what love does when we let it. It expands our vision of what's possible." Love, the word had hovered unspoken between Owen and Bethany for weeks, though both felt its presence in every letter exchanged, every visit anticipated with growing eagerness. Owen tested the concept in his mind, finding that the fear it once evoked had diminished, replaced by a cautious warmth that grew stronger with each encounter. As October painted the Montana landscape in golds and reds, Owen made a decision. The cattle had been moved to winter pastures, the ranch secured for the coming cold months, and his men settled into the slower rhythm of the season. It was time to take the next step, if Bethany was willing. He arrived in Helena with the first light dusting of snow, a small velvet box tucked securely in his coat pocket. Dr. Sullivan, forewarned by letter of Owen's intentions, greeted him with barely contained excitement. "She's at the mercantile," the doctor informed him after ushering Owen into his study, "picking up supplies for my surgery. She should return within the hour." "Good," Owen replied, fingers unconsciously touching the pocket containing the ring. "That gives me time to speak with you properly, Doctor." Sullivan's eyebrows rose. "I believe my approval has been evident for some time, Owen, but if formal permission is what you seek, you most certainly have it." "Thank you," Owen said, the simple words inadequate to express his gratitude for the doctor's support. "But there's more I wanted to discuss, about the future if Bethany accepts." Ah, Sullivan nodded, understanding. The practical considerations, where you'll live, how you'll manage both your responsibilities and hers. Exactly, Owen leaned forward in his chair. I've given it considerable thought. The Circle C is my home, my livelihood, but I understand that Bethany has commitments here to you and your practice. She does, Sullivan acknowledged, though I would never stand in the way of her happiness. I'm not asking her to choose, Owen clarified. At least not immediately. I thought perhaps, if she's willing, we might begin with extended visits. She could spend time at the ranch, learning its operations, while still returning to Helena to assist you when needed. The doctor considered this thoughtfully, a reasonable compromise at least for the short term and in the longer view. In time, I hope she'll consider the Circle C her home, Owen admitted. But I also understand that might require changes on my part. The ranch house would need improvements to be suitable for a family. Perhaps eventually an assistant for you, to free Bethany from her obligations here. Sullivan's smile was knowing. You've thought this through thoroughly. I have, Owen agreed. Because I want to offer her a future that honors who she is, her independence, her commitments, her dreams, not just my own. That, the doctor said approvingly, is precisely why I believe you're worthy of her. Many men would simply expect a woman to abandon her life and conform to theirs. You're offering partnership instead. Before Owen could respond, the front door opened, and Bethany's voice called out a greeting. Sullivan rose quickly, winking at Owen. Perfect timing. I suddenly remember an urgent house call I must make. I trust you can entertain yourself in my absence. Owen stood, straightening his coat nervously. Thank you, Doctor. Sullivan clasped his hand firmly. Good luck, son, though I don't think you'll need it. The doctor slipped out through a side door just as Bethany entered the study, her cheeks flushed from the cold and her arms laden with packages. Uncle James, the mercantile, had those bandages you wanted, but she stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the sight of Owen. Owen, I didn't know you were coming today. I wanted to surprise you, he said, moving forward to take the packages from her arms. Here, let me help with those. As he relieved her of her burden, their hands brushed, sending the now familiar warmth through Owen's body. 3 months of courtship had done nothing to diminish the effect Bethany had on him. If anything, his feelings had only deepened with greater knowledge of her character, her intelligence, her quiet strength. It's a wonderful surprise, she said, smiling up at him as he set the packages aside. But where's Uncle James? I thought I heard his voice. He remembered an urgent house call, Owen explained, unable to keep a hint of amusement from his tone. Very convenient timing. Bethany laughed, understanding immediately. I see. So we're unchaperoned. How scandalous, Mr. Calloway. Temporarily at least, he agreed, taking her hands in his. I hope you don't mind. Not in the slightest, her smile softened as she studied his face. You look serious today, Owen. Is everything all right at the ranch? Everything's fine, he assured her quickly. Better than fine, actually. The winter preparations are complete, the cattle are settled in the protected pastures, and the new barn roof is finally finished. I'm glad to hear it, she said, though her eyes still held a question. But that doesn't explain why you're here a week earlier than you planned. Owen took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I'm here because I couldn't wait any longer to ask you something important. Something that couldn't be put into a letter or delayed until our next scheduled visit. Her expression grew more serious, a mixture of hope and uncertainty in her gaze. What is it, Owen? He led her to the small settee near the fireplace where they sat facing each other, their hands still joined between them. Bethany, he began, her name still a wonder on his lips after all these months. When you came into my life, I was a man who believed he had everything figured out. I had my ranch, my routine, my carefully constructed walls to keep the world at a safe distance. I thought that was enough, that it had to be enough, because anything more meant risking pain I wasn't sure I could survive again. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. And then you smiled at me, he continued, and everything changed, not all at once but gradually, persistently, the way water shapes stone over time. You challenged my assumptions, questioned my isolation, showed me a courage I had forgotten existed. Owen, she murmured, her voice soft with emotion. Please, he said gently. Let me finish, or I might lose my nerve. She nodded, squeezing his hands in encouragement. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," Owen confessed. "Each visit, each letter, each conversation has only strengthened my certainty that what I thought I wanted, safety, predictability, emotional distance, isn't what I need at all. What I need, what I want more than anything, is a future with you." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing the small velvet box. Bethany's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "It was my mother's," he explained. "One of the few things my father managed to save when we left Kansas. I've carried it with me for years, never imagining I'd find someone worthy of wearing it. Until now." Tears glistened in Bethany's eyes as Owen slipped from the settee to one knee before her. "Bethany Hayes, I love you. I love your courage, your determination, your kindness. I love the way you question everything, the way you refuse to accept limitations, the way you see beauty where others see only hardship. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me at the Circle C, a home that reflects both our dreams?" For a moment she seemed unable to speak, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Then, with a joy that transformed her entire countenance, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Owen Calloway, I will marry you. I will build that life, that home, that future with you." With hands that trembled slightly from emotion, Owen slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. When he looked up, the love shining in Bethany's eyes was so powerful it nearly undid him. "I love you," she said, framing his face with her hands. "I have since that first week, when you tried so hard to convince me you were nothing but a practical rancher with no room in his life for connection. I saw through you even then, saw the goodness and the capacity for love you were trying so desperately to deny." Owen rose from his knee to sit beside her once more, drawing her into his arms. "You saw what I couldn't," he acknowledged. "You believed in possibilities I had abandoned." "And now," she asked, her face tilted up to his, "what possibilities do you see now, Owen Calloway?" He smiled, the last shadows of doubt finally dissolving in the warmth of her love. "A ranch that becomes a true home, children running in the fields where cattle graze, challenges faced together instead of alone, a love that grows stronger through the years instead of fading. Forever, Bethany. I see forever with you." When he kissed her then, it was a promise of partnership, of courage, of a future neither could have imagined when they first met on that dusty Montana trail. A future where a cowboy who never believed in forever had not only changed his mind, but committed his heart to making that forever a reality, one day at a time, with the woman whose smile had changed everything. They were married on the first day of spring, 1879, in a small ceremony at the Circle C. Dr. Sullivan performed the service, his voice breaking with emotion as he pronounced them husband and wife beneath an arch of early wildflowers that the ranch hands had gathered as a surprise. Bethany wore a dress of ivory silk trimmed with lace, a concession to tradition that she balanced by insisting on holding the ceremony outdoors, with the Montana sky as their cathedral dome. Owen, standing nervously in his best suit, thought she had never looked more beautiful than she did in that moment, wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair and love shining in her eyes as she spoke her vows. The ranch hands cheered when Owen kissed his bride, their usual reserve abandoned in celebration. Mrs. Winters wiped away tears, proclaiming it was about time this place had a proper family again. Even Jasper, who had bet a month's wages that Owen would never marry, seemed genuinely happy as he offered his congratulations. "Never thought I'd see the day," the old foreman admitted, clasping Owen's hand. "But I'm glad I lived long enough to witness it. She's a fine woman, boss." "The finest," Owen agreed, watching as Bethany laughed with some of the hands nearby. "And the bravest to take on a stubborn rancher like me." The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the yard outside the ranch house. Owen had expanded the building over the winter months, adding rooms for the family he now hoped they would have and improving the furnishings to create the home Bethany deserved. As twilight deepened into night, Owen found a moment alone with his bride on the porch, away from the ongoing festivities. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they looked out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy?" he asked softly, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she replied, turning to smile up at him, the same smile that had first broken through his defenses, now his to treasure for all their days together. Are you? More than I ever thought possible, Owen admitted. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this, any of it. The ranch was enough, or so I convinced myself. Now I wonder how I ever believed that. Bethany's hand covered his where it rested on the porch railing. We believe what we need to survive, Owen. You needed those walls then, but I'm glad they came down. So am I, he said, drawing her closer, though I still marvel at how easily you walked through them. She laughed softly, not easily. You were quite stubborn, as I recall. It took a cattle drive, rustlers, and a stampede to convince you I might be worth the risk. Worth every risk, he corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Every fear faced, every doubt overcome. You taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about loving anyway, despite the fear. Her eyes shone in the gathering darkness. My brave cowboy who finally believed in forever. Because you showed me how, Owen said simply. And I promise to spend the rest of our lives proving worthy of that gift. Inside, the music changed to a slower tune, the notes drifting out to where they stood. Owen extended his hand to his wife in invitation. Mrs. Calloway, may I have this dance? Bethany's smile was luminous as she placed her hand in his. For tonight and all our tomorrows. As they danced beneath the vast Montana sky, stars appearing one by one like promises in the darkness, Owen marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a chance meeting on a dusty trail to this moment of perfect belonging, their path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been challenges, rustlers and stampedes, yes, but also the more subtle obstacles of fear and doubt, of old wounds and ingrained habits. Yet they had faced each challenge together, growing stronger with each one overcome. And now, with Bethany in his arms and their future stretching before them like the endless prairie, Owen Calloway finally understood the truth she had been trying to teach him from the beginning. That love wasn't a weakness to be feared, but a strength to be embraced, a foundation upon which everything else could be built. The cowboy who never believed in forever had not only changed his mind, but had committed his heart to making that forever as beautiful and enduring as the smile that had first kindled hope in a soul long resigned to solitude. And as the music played and the stars watched over the Circle Sea, that forever was just beginning.